All right, welcome to the Tuesday, November 19th, 2024 regular meeting of the Ann Arbor Planning Commission. For detailed information on meeting procedures, please review the full printed meeting agenda provided. Ms. Kelly, will you please call the roll?
Sure. Lee?
Here.
Weiss?
Here.
Hammerschmidt?
Here.
Abrams?
Here.
Dish?
Here.
Mills?
Here.
Weatherby?
Here.
Adams?
Here.
Noting that Commissioner Norton is absent with advance notice this evening.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Commissioner White and seconded by Commissioner Mills. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of October 1st, 2024? Moved by Commissioner Weatherby and seconded by Commissioner Mills. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. Next up are reports of the Planning Commission and written communications. I will start with Councilmember Dish.
I am completely unprepared for this.
I saw yesterday, for example, that the child care and the, I believe, private schools as a special exception use passed yesterday.
First reading.
First reading. Oh,
yes,
first reading.
on first reading.
Okay, gotcha. Yep, thank you.
And I think that we passed the that tiny little orphan plot thing a few meetings ago. Remember that little bitty orphaned thing that needed to be rezoned?
Was it for the South Pond site?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
We did
yes.
that because it's been since October 1st that we haven't had a meeting, and so I completely blanked on how far.
Okay.
What else
it was
we
that
might have
little
done.
remnant parcel
Yeah.
that was like 0.04 acres or something
Yeah.
like that. It's extremely small.
And if you would like, Councilmember Dish, I could go to planning
Give
report.
me a sec.
Yeah, sure. In the meantime, let's go to staff manager report.
Well, one thing I can take off of Councilmember Dish's plate is to advise that your bylaws were approved by council on November 7th. So this was part 2 of 2 pieces required to ensure that only 5 affirmative votes would be needed to pass an item at the Planning Commission table. So that is now in effect, and you no longer require 6 affirmative votes for action items. Your Comp Plan Steering Committee meeting is occurring tomorrow evening, and the Comprehensive Plan Subcommittee will take place next Tuesday on 11/26.
Perfect. Thank you. And I will come back to Councilmember Dish if there's anything to add.
We did pass the tweaks that we made to TC1. We made several tweaks to TC1 to accommodate the parking garage and
Block length, right?
block length, and rectify the curb cut issue where we weren't allowing enough of those. And we also did the excellent height exceptions thing that we did. There's some stormwater things, but the height exception is the best. So that is allowing additional height to the building for things that need it, like elevator overruns. So these things were detracting from habitable space. We changed that, and council approved of that. There may have been a little bit more on October 21st, but we'll just leave that for the history books.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Do other commissioners or liaison have anything to report? Yeah, Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
ORC met at the end of October. I'm trying to remember what we talked about. It was amendments to the UDC. We talked about allowing a driveway to be a parking space if it does not go up to an actual parking structure. We talked about reducing barriers to establish and expand student co-ops. And I feel like there was more. Was it home occupations? And updated bicycle parking standards. We didn't talk about home occupations. Allowing accessory, it's allowing accessory commercial units as home occupation. We talked about those things.
Thank you. Any other committee liaisons have anything to report? Seeing none, written communications are included in today's packet. So we're going to move on to public comment. This is an opportunity for individuals to speak up to 3 minutes about an issue that is not listed as a public hearing. We'll first hear from those present and then those remote participants. Please note that this is the item relating to home occupations. Will not have a unique public hearing, so now is a good time to speak on that particular item before it is discussed. To speak remotely, please press star 9 on the phone or use the raise hand feature in Zoom. For phone access, please call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will identify callers by the last 3 digits of the phone number if available, or by name for Zoom users, and you'll hear an automated announcement that when it's your turn to speak. Please do move to a quiet area, mute any background noise so we can hear you clearly. For all participants, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. With that, welcome to, I think, looks like students. Are there any of those present that would like to speak? Home occupation, if you are here for that one, this is the right time to speak. This is like my class. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to, is there anyone who would like to address the commission remotely?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay, I'm going to give it a few more moments. Extra credit if you have a comment? No? Okay, with that, we will close public comment. Okay, we're going to move on to public hearing scheduled for the next business meeting, and with that, we will go to staff.
For the Planning Commission meeting on Tuesday, December 3rd, 2024, the first of 2 items is Dexter-Siebold Park rezoning. The proposed rezoning of 2570, 2576, and 2580 Dexter Road to public land. The lots were recently acquired by the city for a public park. The second is an amendment to Chapter 55, Unified Development Code, Section 5.3.2, non-conforming structure, a proposed amendment to Section 5.3.2 to allow administrative approval of new interior habitable space and additions to non-conforming structures in residential districts.
Thank you. Moving on to Section 8A of the agenda, unfinished business, there are none, which takes us to our first regular business. I'm going to introduce our petition, which is 1146, South Maple Road, PUD rezoning and site plan. The PUD site plan, planned unit development, and PUD site from, zoning for 1146 South Maple Road. This proposed project includes the annexation of the site from Scioto Township and zoning to PUD for multifamily residential with 1 building providing 39 affordable housing units. Staff recommendation is approval, and I believe we have the petitioner presentation, and in person, I believe we have Miss Wendy Carty-Saxon and Avalon Housing, as well as Brandon Hodges, and then the development advisors from Tribe. So with that, I believe we will go to petitioner presentation.
Mr. Chair, briefly, when it gets to staff remarks, we also have Planner Shake on virtually.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I really appreciate having us here to go over our Hickory Way 3 development. We are very excited to be bringing it forward to Planning Commission. I'm Wendy Carty-Saxon, the Director of Real Estate Development at Avalon Housing. All right, so a quick agenda of what we're looking to cover today in our presentation. So I'll just jump in and give you a little brief overview of Avalon, our mission and current activities. I think many of you are quite familiar with us, but our mission is to build healthy, safe, and inclusive supportive housing communities as a long-term solution to homelessness. And essential to that is the offering of a number of services, support services as well, being flexible, voluntary, on-site, and not time-limited, and tailored around the individual needs and helping to successfully maintain housing. So we're really excited to be looking at bringing another development online. We have 2 developments currently under construction in the city of Ann Arbor. 50 units at the Grove at Viridian on Platte Road near United Way, and 63 units at Dunbar Tower on Catherine in partnership with the Ann Arbor Housing Commission. Our Grove should be completed in the summer of this coming year, 2025, and Dunbar in 2026, February. And both of those also, of course, came through this body as well for approvals. And in 2020, 2021, we brought online 70 units at Hickory Way Apartments Phases 1 and 2, right adjacent to this site, and that picture there is of Hickory Way 1. And then just quickly to introduce our development team. So Avalon will be the developer, owner, property manager, sponsor, service provider. I'm here. Our executive director, Aaron Cooper, is also here. Other Avalon staff to answer questions here are on the phone. Our architect is Fusco, Schaefer, and Pappas. Scott Kelly is here from them. Fusco has been the architect for numerous tax credit developments, including a site in Ann Arbor, White State, and Henry. We have also selected our general contractor for this development now, O'Neill Construction, and they're the ones that are also doing our Dunbar development downtown. Our civil engineer, who's also here, is Kathy Kyneth of Macon Engineering. She's been our civil on Dunbar, Catherine, the Hickory Way 1 and 2, et cetera, and also obviously many other developments around town. Environmental, we're working with two firms, ASTI and ECT. They're the ones doing our wetland stuff through our 8-step process. And as Avalon's had the good fortune of having a number of developments underway at once right now, we brought on Brandon Hodges of Tribe Development on board as a development consultant to do the heavy lifting on this. And so I'm going to turn it over to him to give some additional development details.
Thank you, Wendy. So I wanted to touch a little bit about the existing site. So the property is located in Scioto Township currently, as necessitating the annexation request. It's approximately 1.15 acres, as you can see. I think it's also important to note there are some efficiencies that we're also trying to drive because of the proximity to the Hickory Way 1 and 2 directly north of the site. So in terms of property management, service provision, it's really important to have some of these sites co-located just for efficiency purposes. We did submit for annexation that was presented at the City Council meeting on November 7th, so that's currently under review and underway. All said and done, from a scheduling perspective, we're hoping to kind of get through the annexation and the site plan approval process, hopefully by the end of Q1 2025. That's important for a handful of reasons. Probably more importantly is our project is a low-income housing tax credit project, so we have applied for the first round of funding. If we are not successful in getting the initial allocation of tax credits, the next funding cycle is in April, so we're trying to hit that milestone. Also of note, the project is located adjacent to what is qualified as a low-quality wetland. We had a wetland delineation report conducted by ASTI, our environmental consultant. As you can see, it's a little bit over 0.08 acres, so nothing of significance. We do have an approved wetland permit approval that is on file with you guys. As a part of our funding, though, we also have to go through an 8-step analysis to basically, think through mitigation strategies to the extent that they're possible. So we want to be good stewards of the natural environment, but we're going through that process right now with ECT, our environmental consultant. And really just the justification for why we're seeking the PUD. We looked at a handful of zoning classifications. We think that it will really optimally create the most flexibility for the site that we're trying to create in terms of the use, in terms of the flexibility for parking, for the layout of the building. And I think it's really important because of the continual use of affordable housing. We like the fact that this is going to be perpetually used to address the housing concerns that we have in the Ann Arbor community. And so this is just a chart comparison to the existing zoning. Because it's in Scioto Township, we are requesting the PUD for the new zoning. And then a little bit of an overview about the development in general. We will be having 39 units on site, all 1 bedroom. As I mentioned, this is a low-income housing tax credit project, so really addressing deep affordability within the Ann Arbor housing community. At least 40% of the units will be at 60% of area median income, but realistically, 100% of those units will likely be affordable. And this will offer supportive services and will be a supportive housing development, so at least 35% of the units will be designated as such. I won't go through all of the exhaustive amenities on site, but I do want to call out a few. Obviously, we're going to be sharing services with some of the Hickory Way 1 and 2 buildings. We will also have service provision on site directly on our site, directly south. There will be resident bike storage, so 6 type A, 4 type B. There will be 20 units of parking on the site, and this has been informed by a couple of different factors. One, just utilization across Avalon's portfolio. We feel like that's an optimal mix. It's about 0.5 per unit, and also keeping in line with the standards that we would have to adhere to with the Michigan State Housing Development Authority. This falls directly in line with that. And we also have secured 20 units of project-based vouchers from the Ann Arbor Housing Commission. That just adds to the revenue and the operational capacity for the project. We will have a variety of EV charging stations capability on site, controlled door access, and then our architect will also speak to the sustainability and green features that we are proposing. And with that, I will turn it over to Fusco Schaefer-Pappas, who can talk about the design of the building and our sustainability strategy.
Where am I? Do I press? Do I get it forward? What am I doing wrong? Oh, there we go. Sustainability. The Avalon Housing Project for Hickory Way 3 represents a step in the commitment to address both the urgent need for affordable housing and as well as being environmentally responsible and providing a building that meets those requirements. We will be going with an NGBS Silver net zero build program that's part of the requirements. The project will focus on the building being super insulated building envelope, sealing the building as well. We will have constant testing done to make sure that we're meeting those requirements. High performance windows, meeting Energy Star requirements, not only current Energy Star, but the Energy Star that's supposed to be approved in the next couple of years, which those standards are even going to be more stringent. Energy efficient fixtures and equipment throughout the apartments. The average apartment size will be about roughly 650 square feet, but everything within the apartment will be efficient. We will be focusing on creating Energy Star rated appliances wherever possible. Everything will be electric, no gas in terms of the appliances and or mechanical systems within the building. We will be, applying the cool roof technologies along with that, as Brandon talked about, the EV capability of the parking spaces that we already have in place. Basically, our goal is to reduce the energy bills for the landlord and the tenants, enhance the air quality, noise and light pollution mitigation, and creating an overall healthier environment for our residents. The structure itself is a 4-story structure, as Brandon talked about. It is 39 units. Roughly each of the units is 650 square feet over the 4 stories. The exterior of the building, here's the site plan. You can see where the 20 parking spaces are currently. 4 stories. Here's a layout of the units. And there's, on the first floor, there's some community spaces, as well as some service-related services for that Avalon provides. A lot of the back of the house, mechanical and electricals in the rear of the building. Here's an exterior of the building.
You can keep going. Oh, no, please keep going.
Okay.
We'll add a little bit more time.
Okay.
Thanks.
The goal of the exterior is to use sustainable materials using a lot of masonry, fiber cement, siding, and then obviously the high efficiency windows that we talked about. Let's see. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the presentation. With that, we're going to go over to staff presentation. Planner Kowalski.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commission. Okay, petitioners did a great job of kind of summarizing up the details of the project, so I really wanted to touch on a couple of the main items here before you tonight. As you know, this is a PUD, which requires two separate motions. It's a PUD site plan as well as a PUD zoning. So this is a petition that will go to City Council after action tonight. There is also a third action that was required with this petition that was mentioned in your staff report, which was the annexation. Typically in the past, you guys have always seen annexations with the zoning and the site plan. There's no state or city code requirement that happen. In this case, the city's goal of prioritizing affordable housing as well as the petitioner's tight deadline, the annexation was permitted to go forward to City Council was earlier this month, which was approved. So what that enabled, that already be sent to the state so that the state could start working on that annexation. Because what happens, the state does need to process it on their own. So typically when we have all three actions together at Planning Commission, there's a little bit more of a downtime between when we get the petition back from the state for the annexation, when we can schedule it for City Council. So hopefully this saves a little bit of time. So the two motions before you tonight are just for the site plan, the PUD site plan, as well as the PUD zoning. And again, and as well as in the past, it was mentioned about a wetland use permit. Sometimes in the past, you guys would see those as well. That is now staff action. So staff has reviewed and approved the wetland use permit that was applicable for the development here tonight. Again, I really want to jump to the PUD analysis kind of. It was touched on as well that really when any petition's brought forward to staff, ideally, a PUD is not the first choice. We would like to fit it into a standard zoning district if possible. So you could see in the staff report as well as what was in the presentation is the closest zoning district that we would have would be an R4E zoning district, which works in a lot of ways. Actually, it works in almost every way, except for side setback. So it works as far as density and open space, everything else, but a side setback, which in this case is the northern setback, which is adjacent to the Hickory Way 1 and 2 development. Due to the length of the building, our code has a requirement that building lengths above 50 feet have an additional side setback. So what that would do is that would push this building to a required 28-foot setback from what they have now, which is, I believe, 10 feet at this case. So they would have to adjust the building to accommodate for that 28-foot side setback. So that would significantly either eliminate or reduce the parking and possibly the unit size as well. So the other issue with the PUD, so really that is the only straight up zoning reason for that the PUD is requested tonight. Another way where it did come in handy though, however, is the vehicular use area, the buffer that's required from that. It's required a 15-foot wide buffer adjacent to land that's residential or park. In this case, it's land adjacent to the west as well as to the south. They do meet the requirement to the south, and they pretty much almost meet it on the west, except for a small portion where the turnaround for solid waste and fire access needed to bump into that setback in that area, which reduces the conflicting land use buffer in that area to about 6 feet for about a width of about 20 feet. So it's not the entire length of that rear, and again, it is adjacent directly to a park. They're providing landscaping within that small 20-foot area, but the conflicting land use buffer is only 6 feet wide in that case. So again, that would require either a variance if it was a straight zoning, or obviously done through a PUD, that is allowed to be modified. So yeah, that was, and again, it's also, so of course in going forward with the PUD route, we have to look at the justifications. So in this case is obvious. I mean, we have a 100% affordable housing project and a large portion of which may be, very supportive housing as well. So that's consistent with the adjacent land use. It's consistent with all of our city policies and goals, as well as some of the environmental features they're adding there within the project. That staff does feel that the justification for this PUD is warranted. I wanted to make sure if I covered anything else regarding the PUD item, but no, I think that about covers all the summary information I wanted to hit regarding the PUD the zoning. And staff obviously is recommending approval of both the zoning as well as the PUD site plan. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Planner Kowalski. We're going to move on to public hearing. This is an opportunity for individuals to speak up to 3 minutes on this item. We'll first hear from those present and then remote participants. To speak remotely, please press *9 if on the phone or use the raise hand feature if you're on Zoom. For phone access, please call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will identify callers by the last 3 digits of the phone number or by name it for Zoom users, and you'll you'll hear an automated announcement when it's your turn to speak. Please ensure you're in a quiet area and mute any background noises. For all participants, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak to the commission? Yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Ellis. I am a resident of Ann Arbor in Ward 4 on 1207 Van Dusen Drive, and I'm also on staff at Avalon Housing. I'm the Director of Mission Advancement. Data from our community's most recent homelessness point-in-time count shows that overall homelessness has increased in Washtenaw County 20% since 2020, and 50% for folks who are chronically homeless. Chronic homelessness is when folks have experienced homelessness for at least a year or repeatedly over many years while also navigating a disabling condition. As a local nonprofit, Avalon exists to address this crisis head-on by creating affordable housing like the Hickory Way 3 development that is being proposed tonight, and pairing that housing with wraparound support services that are neighbors, many of whom are exiting homelessness. Our staff, in partnership with other organizations like Food Gatherers and Packard Health, provide services such as food assistance, mental health and chronic disease management, general social work services, substance use and recovery services, and in-home cleaning assistance, just to name a portion of what we do. This type of permanent supportive housing is the most effective long-term solution to homelessness. Some of our tenants today are folks who moved into Avalon housing properties back in the 90s when we first started. If allowed to move forward, Hickory Way 3 will become many people's permanent home and real community. To give some more context, according to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the Housing First model, where people have experienced homelessness move directly into housing, has an 84% success rate of working with folks to keep them housed. It's highly effective. But at Avalon, we pair Housing First with robust wraparound support services, and we are able to help our tenants remain housed 96% of the time. And because of that, Avalon is a national model within the supportive housing sector. With Hickory Way 3, we are excited to be able to offer more of this highly effective supportive housing that is deeply needed in our community. Thank you for your consideration of this project.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else that would like to speak at this time?
Hi there. My name is Gabe Grossman. I live at 722 East Kingsley in Ward 1. I am a student at the University of Michigan. I am also the Vice President of Outreach at the University of Michigan's Urbanism Club, where we voice the students' body's concern for housing, transportation, and accessibility. I am here to express support for this and also bring light how ridiculous it is to have a housing project need so much permission to fit into the PUD and for it to actually pass, how much red tape there is for that. I think the fact that, all these housing developments don't meet small requirements and setbacks for R4 is a little bit ridiculous and is very disincentivizing of more housing developments. And I would like to see, that developments like this fit in more often to our zoning ordinances so that, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have other speakers? Welcome.
Thanks, Chair Lee. Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Hill Court. I'm also here to speak in support of this project. As Mr. Ellis said, homelessness is very much on the rise now, but it's not a new problem. I took part in the protests that led to the creation of Avalon. A little historical color for the young people in the audience and on commission. Back in 1990, the city was planning to build a parking structure behind Klein's department store at the corner of William and South Ashley. And there were 3 houses at the time on the site that were slated for demolition. And the Housing Action Committee recruited some of its homeless members to squat in 2 of those houses, and leading to a standoff with the city that lasted an entire year. The squatters finally agreed to move out when the city agreed to preserve these homes, moving them to a different site. And Avalon was spun out of the Shelter Association to create low-income housing. I was present at a bunch of rallies during this year in support of the squatters, and the parking structure plan died, unfortunately, and Avalon was created, and I think, I imagine, I think it's something like over 1,000 people now, low-income tenants that it serves, and it's more active than ever in building. The only question I have about this really great project is the heating system. I'm glad to hear just now that the building will be all electric, no gas appliances. This is a question that came up at the May 7th pre-PUD meeting, and Commissioner Hammersmith at the time asked about the all-electric status of the building, and there was a suggestion from staff and from Commissioner Hammersmith that this be written into the supplemental regs. I don't see it in the draft regs. I think, it's not that, there's a question of trust, but it would be good that this would run with the property in case the project's not built. Honestly, we can't be putting in fossil fuel infrastructure in any new construction if we're serious about climate change. The other question I have is that in the site plan document on A2 Stream, it does refer to all electric space conditioning systems, but also mentions 95% high efficiency furnaces, which can only be gas, I think. So is that a typo? Is that an error? So that's my question about that. I just want to be sure that we're all talking about the same thing here. I commend Avalon for doing so much to combine sustainability with affordability. My understanding is that the Catherine and Viridian projects will also be all electric. They're setting a great example for other developers throughout the city. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garber. Any others that would like to speak at this time? Do we have any remote participants?
We do. Amanda, Washtenaw Housing Alliance, you have permission to address the Planning Commission.
Hi, Planning Commission. Can you hear me okay? I think so.
Yes, we can.
Amanda Carlisle calling in. I live at 1619 Waltham Drive in Ann Arbor, which is approximately 0.8 miles from the project. I'm also the executive director of the Washtenaw Housing Alliance, which is a coalition of over 25 nonprofit and government partners working to end homelessness and expand affordable housing options in Washtenaw County. And Avalon is one of our member agencies. I'm calling in to support approving the Hickory Way 3 project PUD rezoning and site plan. We know from a 2015 county affordable housing plan that within Washtenaw County, we need to add over 3,000 units of affordable non-student rentals. And this project will add 39 more units of affordable housing to our community and expand Avalon's Hickory Way complex, which truly does provide critical on-site staffing 24/7 and supportive housing case management services that help people maintain their housing. Avalon has a proven track record of success in the community, and the Hickory Way 1 and 2 properties have been great additions to our community already. What I am most thrilled about is the deep targeting of the affordability for this project, including a significant number of units dedicated to people earning 30% of the area median income, which means those who otherwise would not be able to find housing anywhere in Ann Arbor or surrounding communities will be able to do so in this project. So thank you in advance for supporting this project's PUD and site plan.
Thank you. Do we have any other remote callers?
There are no further hands raised.
Okay, give it a few more seconds. Okay, with that, we'll close public comment. I'm going to read the proposed motions, which is that the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission recommends that the mayor and city council approve the 1146 South Maple Road Plan Unit Development Zoning District and supplemental regulations subject to the necessary revisions as directed by the City Planning Commission. And the second motion, which we'll hear together, is that the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission recommends that the mayor and city council approve the 1146 South Maple Road Plan Unit Development Site Plan. Moved by Commissioner White and seconded by Councilmember Dish. We are in discussion. Who would like to kick us off? Commissioner Mills.
Thank you very much. I do my normal thing of comparing what we see on the site plan to what are in the supplemental regs, and it's real close. I think, and in terms of consistency with what's in the R4E and I think what's allowed is 10 feet from the side setback, and it's showing 13. So like I think we got that all we dot I's and cross T's. So I think that is great. If this project doesn't get built and the supplemental regs continue on in this site, we would have at least 39 affordable housing units, but it's not capped at that. But what is capped, it would be pretty darn close to, is the open space. Like, we know we're going to get, what's shown on the site plan is 42% open space. They're required to have 40. So it's not like we could get tons of parking. Instead, so I think that all of that makes sense. I'm curious about the heating, what the space conditioning, what you're anticipating for that.
Yeah, we are looking at electric heat, so yeah, the furnace thing was...
Just a carryover.
Yeah, carryover. I will say, though, with the elevator, we are looking to have a generator out there, so I think similar to what we've done at others, that would be gas-powered, the generator, maybe future things, but just wanted to make sure that was clear. But yeah, I think we'd be looking at air source heat pumps. That's similar to what we do in the units at Hickory Way 1 and 2.
Okay. I'm going to ask, would you be amenable to including a requirement for all electric in the supplemental regs, or, I'll ask.
It's always nice to have flexibility just in case, but if the commission is wanting to put that in there, again, definitely with the exception of the generator, we would be open to that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other commissioners with comments? Commissioner White.
Just a couple. One, thanks for bringing the project. I'm sorry you have to do it as a PUD. I echo the sentiment of the Urbanism Club. I think this is really ridiculous because of how the UDC is structured around those setbacks. So this goes to Mr. Kowalski. As we are working on the comp plan, I know we are going to reduce some of our zoning districts, down from 32 to potentially 4. This would still ride in because it's actually in the UDC, and it's set up around the site, not necessarily particular zoning districts. So how do we avoid this in the future?
Good question. I mean, we would basically have to do a zoning amendment. So you're right, it's in the UDC. I believe it's in all the R4 side setbacks that the additional, there's something for additional building length as well as additional building height. So either one of those could be flexed. So you're right. I mean, I think this is something that obviously is kind of a smaller issue, which wasn't touched on really in the comp plan process, but it could, at the direction of Planning Commission, be something we would investigate. I don't know the ramifications of, whether that would necessarily be good or bad, but I mean, it would be something that would have to be through a code amendment process.
Okay. And then for our, working plan, I think I've raised this issue before the first time it came up, and we've had at least 2, if not 3 developments that ran into something small like this. I think it was the court.
Mary Court.
Yes, Mary Court was another one of these cases. So just daylighting that again. Was looking at the public comments, and so this is for the petitioner. The first thing I wanted to ask you all about, let me start with staff and then I'll ask you. A public commenter called in and asked or wrote in about utility capacity. So with this new development going in, all of that would be addressed with this development?
Right, that's correct.
So there's not going to be any drag on power or water?
I mean, we haven't, I know water, sanitary, all that's looked at through the site plan process. We do include DTE and routing through our site plans. Now, we don't necessarily get the comments back from them on that, but we haven't been aware of any issues in this area, which a lot of times we are if there's new developments that people say that they have power issues. So, yeah, but that would be kind of a separate issue. We don't really go into a lot of detail on that necessarily in the site plan.
Okay. And then we didn't need to do a traffic study here because...
Yeah, there was a basic traffic analysis done, correct. Yes.
Okay, so there wasn't
No
going to be a
issues.
significant
That's
impact on
correct.
traffic?
Yes.
Okay. And then to the petitioner, so this public commenter was concerned about two things in addition to the two that I brought up. One was what they perceived as an increase of non-resident dumpster diving in and on their property, so they would be across the street from your development, or panhandling with residents. And so I just wondered if you wanted to speak to how your supportive services work, what sort of interactions that you have with your residents as well as with neighbors as a way to address that, if that's okay.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Or whoever on the team. And I just think it's a helpful thing for you all to talk to the public about how you interact with your residents and then their neighbors.
Good evening. Good evening, Commissioner. How you all doing?
Good.
Yeah, to the question, I would say, I'm not going to say it's an issue, but we have a really robust service department, and our service department works really closely with our residents, and so we don't really see that at our properties. Will I say it doesn't exist? I won't go as far as say that, but we partner with many partners, whether it's housing to home or what have you. Like I think one of our directors said, food pantry. So we don't really see our residents kind of panhandling and standing out. I think they really respect our properties. I think they really want the properties to look apart and look a part of the community. We do have one of our residents here that could really speak towards, actually lives in the Hickory Way 1 and 2, that could really speak towards the upkeep and the pride that the residents have. So I don't really see, when I'm out in the properties and talking to our staff, I don't really see that as an issue, but I wouldn't go as far as to say it doesn't happen. But again, I have to give credit to our service staff because they really make sure that the residents have what they need.
Okay.
So.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, please.
Is there a way for adjacent residents to reach out to Avalon if they have concerns?
Absolutely.
How do they do that?
Yeah, so not at the specific property, but we also have a general number. Sorry, I don't have it.
It's okay.
But we have a general number that folks can call. And even myself as executive director, I'm sorry, I didn't say I'm the executive director, Aaron Cooper. I'm always open to talking to residents, non-residents, those in the community, if there are concerns. But again, usually we, at our Hickory Way property now, we have 24/7 staff. Not that, folks will reach out in the evening, but we try to make sure we have the property staff. Well, again, we do have a general number, thank you, Scott, that I will read out to everyone. It's 734-663-5858.
Okay.
I'll say it again, 734-663-5858. And I'm sure it gets someone, or they can even ask for myself, Aaron Cooper.
Okay, thank you. One more question?
Sure. Go ahead.
Can you all remind me when the first Hickory Way and 2 were developed? What years? And when you welcomed residents?
Yeah, so we started building them in 2019 is when we closed on Hickory Way 1, and then 2 shortly thereafter. And then April 2021 for Hickory Way 1, and I think November 2021 for Hickory Way 2 was when folks started moving in.
Okay, and then this is just a comment. The last comment in this public comment was the neighbor was concerned about the presence of affordable housing having a negative impact on their property values. And just for the record, in particular, this property increased in value over 20% since you developed your first one. So it doesn't seem like you're having that kind of impact on the community. And again, we're grateful for that you're bringing this development. And I wish it was, as the Urbanist Club said, a less onerous process for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners with comments, thoughts? Okay, I'll just add, I think everything that we I wanted to cover. Thank you for addressing the public comments. For the students that are here, the PUD is when it doesn't fit any of the other zoning categories, so it has to meet a specific type of requirements. And the things that we're going to look at is innovation and land use variety and design, economy, and efficiency of land use, the provision of open space, again, 42% being preserved for open space, and then preservation, protection of natural features, which we saw with the wetland coordinations, as well as expansion of supply of affordable housing. So it really does meet most of the characteristics. 0.5 in terms of spaces per unit. So again, from connectivity through bike, I think the bike score here is pretty well. I do drive and travel on this corridor quite frequently. So all of that said, I would be in support of this. The only thing that I want to ask is whether somebody wants to make a motion to add the supplemental regulations, but that being said, I'm also open to just keeping it flexible. So with that, I believe we're ready for a roll call vote.
I'm sorry, did you take both motions together?
Yes, we took
Okay,
both
thank
motions
you.
together. Yep.
On the two motions as presented, Lee,
Yes.
Weish,
Yes.
Hammerschmidt,
Yes.
Abrams,
Yes.
Adams,
Yes.
Weatherby,
Yes.
Mills,
Yes.
Dish.
Yes.
That carries.
Great, thank you. Good luck. You are right, 5 different steps for pre-PUD, yes, applications, yeah, it can be pretty onerous, so. All right, with that, we're gonna move on to other business. This is section 10A, this is ACU home occupations. This is accessory commercial units report and home occupations. This report responds to council resolution number 24-368 by reviewing regulations for home occupations in Ann Arbor and comparing them to other jurisdictions, as well as explores the topic of accessory commercial units, ACUs, and how they could be integrated into the city's residential districts. With that, we are going to move to staff presentation with Deputy Planning Manager Hank Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have the pleasure of talking about this topic today, which is pretty interesting. So a couple of things, home occupations and then accessory commercial units and some other connected topics are discussed at the end of the report that is in today's packet. This does respond to Council Resolution R24-368. Among other items in the resolve clauses, they requested that the Planning Commission consider and propose recommended ordinance amendments to the city's home occupation ordinance for the purpose of allowing more flexibility in the city's requirements regarding home occupations, including ACUs, in the city's residential neighborhoods. And so this evening, we will discuss home occupations in Ann Arbor and how they compare to some other jurisdictions that you will see in the report and in this presentation, and also discuss accessory commercial units and their potential in Ann Arbor, as well as some next steps forward. For each, I thought it would be helpful to include some definitions, which I also shared with the Ordinance Revisions Committee. The first of which is a home occupation. All of these are current definitions that are in your Unified Development Code. So a home occupation is an accessory use of a non-residential nature that is performed within a dwelling unit or within an accessory building and conducted by members of the family residing in the dwelling unit and not more than one additional employee. An accessory use is a land use that is subordinate in use, area, or purpose to a principal land use on the same lot and serving a purpose naturally and normally incidental to such principal land use. And an accessory building is a building that is subordinate in use, area, and purpose to the principal use and principal building in which an accessory use is contained or conducted on the lot. Accessory buildings can be attached or detached to a principal building. When attached, the accessory building shall be considered part of a principal building for setback purposes. I want to dwell on this slide for a little bit. This is on page 2 of the planning report. And this is my best attempt, as I've had this task to consider what is the difference between a home occupation and an accessory commercial unit. My best attempt at distinguishing them. So home occupations are not necessarily meant to be seen. It's a way to add flexibility to your property. It's primarily for the people who live there, and it is low impact, and that is defined by jurisdictions all over the country in different ways, but it can mean less vehicular trips, less people or no people coming to the home, less people who are working there. It's typically not a physical change. It's a addition of another use, and there's not a lot of external evidence that that use is there. There's not a wide amount of signage or display of goods. There's not a walk-up window. It's your home, and it's subordinate to a primary residential use on the lot. Whereas accessory commercial units, as I've come to understand them and discuss them with some of the primary advocates, discussed a little later in the report, these are designed intentionally for some type of customer access. They're one of the ways that they have been requested to be incorporated is to increase pedestrian-oriented retail, and so street-facing entrances are common. The customers at a time correspond to building occupancy limits because they're designed to commercial building standards. They include walk-in services, potentially a non-resident business owner, and to a greater extent, non-resident employees. The uses may be more intensive, so whereas you may have a online home office or make small goods in your home for an online store in a home occupation, ACUs have more intensive uses. You may have a corner store. You may have a small massage therapy practice. You might have a small cafe. And the physical modifications are much more robust because they're meeting those public health and safety goals of commercial properties generally. So they would comply with Americans with Disability Act requirements. They may have bicycle parking considerations. They may have other parking considerations. And they may also display goods and do things like that. But generally still where I've been able to find a few examples of them, either proposed or passed, they remain subordinate to the primary residence. So diving into home occupations on their own. So these are currently in section 5.16.6H of the Unified Development Code. They were updated in 2021, in particular to move away from a specified list of allowed uses to any use that complies with state, local, federal regulations and other requirements of the home occupation section. And I repeat the definition there. As a reminder, our current definition, accessory use of a non-residential nature performed within a dwelling unit or within an accessory building by members of the family residing in the dwelling unit and not more than one additional employee. This is our accessory use table. I've highlighted home occupations. You can see they're allowed in all of our residential districts and many of our mixed-use districts. I did ask about the mixed-use districts, and to a large extent this is redundant because of the nature of our mixed-use districts. If you were wondering why TC1 was left off, we could add it, but it wouldn't necessarily do too much to add it. But to make it tidy, we could, if that was a lingering question someone had. So the areas to consider for the council resolution, but not limited to: maximum permissible floor area, customers per day, customers at a time, number of allowed non-resident employees, and potentially allowing uses not customarily incidental or secondary. The performance standard listed at left is from the UDC. The alphabet item listed corresponds to a section within the subsection of home occupation. So maximum permissible floor area. Currently, Ann Arbor allows up to 25% of the floor area of the principal dwelling unit, or up to 2,000 square feet in an accessory structure, provided that the amount in the accessory structure the accessory building can't exceed the total dwelling unit square footage. We limit customers per day to 24 customers at a time to 6 clients between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. 1 resident employee is allowed. And as far as whether the uses are incidental and secondary, yes. The entire logic of the home occupation and where it lives within the Unified Development Code is within the accessory use section. So it follows that it would be subordinate in use, area, or purpose to the principal land use on the same lot, serving a purpose naturally and normally incidental to such principal land use. If that were not the case, then we would be talking about a primary use. Here is an excerpted version of a much larger comparison city table that was included in attachment 2. If you had downloaded this attachment earlier in the day, I would like to inform you it has been updated for a couple of minor errors. And so you should have the version that reads attachment 2 on it. That's just a little note. But some brief comparisons of where Ann Arbor sits with other cities either in Michigan or which have come up through a little bit of internet research that staff have done include Traverse City regulates the way Ann Arbor used to prior to 2021 by vehicular trips. So instead of customers per day, they say 8 vehicular trips. No regulation of customers at a time, but no resident, non-resident employees. Across the board, I believe every city included that the home occupation should be subordinate to the residential use. You can see that Grand Rapids, for example, has a couple of classes of home occupations. Class C is it's listed different ways in other cities, but they use their Class C home occupation for bed and breakfast and boarding rooms. So we're really looking at Class A and Class B. Class A is, nobody visits, no customers, no employees. You are working from your home in a space that's up to 300 square feet. And for their Class B, it's also up to 300 square feet. And not more than 25% of the dwelling unit area, less than 50% of living area on the main floor. But you could have 2 customers at a time between the hours of 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Grand Rapids does not allow home occupation uses in accessory structures. They also require permits. Ann Arbor does not have a permit scheme for home occupations currently, which is also why I can't tell you how many there are. You may notice also the update year for many cities is very recent. That is because the pandemic caused a lot of requests for more flexibility in home occupations, and so many cities decided to take a hard look at their codes to make sure they weren't being too restrictive and or making sure they allowed for this to begin with. So in Detroit, 25% of total floor area of principal dwelling, that's the same as Ann Arbor, except they limit up to 500 square feet. They have some different regulations if you're in a loft. Non-resident employees, if you're in their lower density residential districts, you can have no employees, whereas in all other districts you would be allowed 2. not allowed in accessory structures, no permit required, and so on. So you can see that I believe, although it's not perfect because some areas of some of these comparison cities just, they don't regulate for certain things, I'm assuming because they believe it will be addressed through other regulation. So they compensate with other regulations. So if we don't limit customers per day, we're just going to say, okay, but you can only have one customer per hour. And there's only so many hours between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. So sometimes if there's an NA, you can back into how that would be regulated anyway. So we are generally in line or more permissive, it appears, than many of the comparison cities that we chose to look at. Enforcement activity patterns can indicate whether or not you have a problem with your regulations because they're too restrictive. If a lot of complaints are generated, or community standards or our zoning enforcement staff are requested to look at issues related to home occupations, that can be a bellwether for we're probably doing something that's out of sync with what residents need. You know, maybe they need something a little more, permissive. But we reviewed our records dating back to 2017, and we only received 1 to 2 complaints annually related to this topic. Generally, these do bubble up to us. The community standards staff, they call our zoning coordinator, John Barrett, on a regular basis. Our other departments, they know who to get this information to. So I don't think it's an issue of us losing complaints in the mail or anything like that. I do think that if they existed, they would reach us, but we've had very few of them. And since the updates in 2021 to the home occupation regulations, there have only been 3. Only 1 resulted in an NOV, or a notice of violation. The other 2 were resolved through just communication, or as Mr. Barrett refers to it, voluntary compliance. He works very hard to resolve things through voluntary compliance so that we are not being punitive. And you can see some of the issues that were at play: customers at a time, parking, nuisance in a mailbox conflict, noise, and in one case that did result in a notice of violation, there was excessive outdoor storage that was spilling out into the right-of-way, and there was a lot of activity that was not meeting our regulations with that, the Stratton Court. There's also one ongoing item related to a tow truck operation that pops up on a semi-regular basis. So initial staff recommendations related to home occupations. We allow up to 25% of the principal dwelling unit now. We could go higher. Some communities say 40%, 49%, or they list the square footage. I don't think that we do the best job of clarifying the total allowed area between the accessory structure, accessory building, and what's allowed in the home. I think we might actually be, it's possible we're incentivizing using an accessory building because it may be greater than 25% of your home. So I think that could be looked at again. We don't have a strong feeling either way, except that it needs to remain accessory in order to logically fit within this section. The number of customers per day seems on the higher side compared to our comparison cities, and also from looking at the conversations that were held, this is recent history with the Planning Commission, there was thought that 24 people, especially at a time, would feel like a lot. And that, if that happened in every home on a block, that could be really disruptive. So we recommend leaving that number, to not touch it. Recommend leaving it as is. So the customers at a time, if we leave customers per day at 24, maybe, the client visits per day could be increase from 6 to something else, or could be removed if with the other, if the 24 number doesn't increase. And for non-resident employees, the live-work option through the Michigan Building Code allows up to 5 non-resident employees, and that seemed like the upper limit of what we would support. It still could feel like a lot if you have 5 guaranteed daily visits before you even have client visits, and that multiplied by every, house on the block could feel like a lot. So we would not recommend going beyond 5. And then we, again, recommend maintaining secondary status. So the follow-up actions, continue comparison city evaluation. We want to continue to refine who we're comparing ourselves against, see if we can reach staff in other cities as needed. I would like, depending on which areas we receive feedback from tonight and from City Council when this report advances, depending on what feedback we receive along the lines of areas of the home occupation to become more use intense, we'd like to hear from internal stakeholders like our transportation group and engineering to just understand if there's anything we haven't foreseen, talk to our building staff again. And then we'd like to use the comprehensive plan process to engage the community further and advance regulatory changes, not just on this, but on the connected topics, accessory commercial units, changes in primary uses. Maybe we don't have the best public materials or publicly available information that we could. That's another thing that we could do, is create more brochures or one-pagers or web content that just says, here's what you're allowed to do now. Because maybe some of the genesis of requests around flexibility come from a place of not knowing what is already allowed. I've seen it before, and it could definitely be the case again. That's something that we can look more deeply into creating. And then at the end, potential text amendments. Accessory commercial units. So these do not have a current definition in our code because they don't exist in our code. I have found very few and varied versions of what these are in the wild, as they say. So I just took a stab at what I think they are based on what I've understood, which is an accessory use of non-residential nature that is performed within an accessory building. It's typically a separate physical space located on a lot with a principal residence, specifically designed for commercial use. Like accessory dwelling units, ACUs are subordinate to the main residence but distinct from it. They may be standalone structures, converted garages, additions to the main house, or dedicated portions of the home with separate entrances. And I've included our accessory building definition again for reference, which is to remind that accessory buildings can be attached or detached. I spoke with Mr. Neil Heller of Neighborhood Workshop in Portland, Oregon. He is one of the folks who have advanced this idea through thought articles and also consulting. He's a nationwide urban planning consultant. He maintains a website, image library, example library called ACUs Across America. And I thought this would be a good person to talk with to figure out where I can find an example of this. And Mr. Heller said, I recommend looking at Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County covers any jurisdiction in that county that doesn't have their own adopted standards. So the city of Los Angeles has their own zoning code, but many unincorporated communities and small cities within the county may not. So this would apply in those places, but it's still a pretty big geographic area with many people. And if you look at the date, it's from September of 2024, which is when this council resolution came down to us for consideration. So it is hot off the press. I have not had a chance to reach out to anyone there to find out, how is this going? Have you had one proposed et cetera. So, but their key development standards are they allow an ACU with a maximum of 1,000 square feet or up to 40% of the residential floor area, whichever is less. 1-story height limit, only allowed on the ground floor, 1 per lot, must face and be oriented to the street, separate entrance required from the main residence. They did allow for more flexible setbacks, in particular the side and front yard setbacks than would traditionally be allowed in residential units, but they did still have them. So it wasn't right up to the line of the sidewalk. They required a minimum 10-foot setback or the pre-existing setback, whichever was more permissive to the ACU. And then there's a carve-out for existing legal structures. Hours are 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily. No outdoor activities or music allowed, so you should contain your commercial uses within that structure. You need to screen your trash, but they don't have parking requirements, and they do allow limited signage. They did, however, have very limited permitted uses. So they allow bakery shops, secondary medical offices, neighborhood serving groceries, party supply stores, restaurants, ice cream shops, secondary dentist offices, delicatessens. But they don't allow any sale of alcohol, art galleries, art supply stores, feed and grain sales, furniture stores, furrier shops, glass and mirror sales, gun dealers, household appliance stores, hardware stores, hobby supply stores, ice sale, office machines, and some other uses. So it is a small list. It is not any use that meets our other requirements. It was, you have this menu of things you can do. In speaking with our own City of Ann Arbor building staff about this topic, I should also mention that the ACUs in Los Angeles County require a ministerial site plan review, which would be the equivalent of our site plan for planning manager in all residential districts. City of Ann Arbor building staff recommended limiting to M, A, and B use classifications, which correspond to mercantile, assembly, and business within the building code. This would screen out any hazardous uses and other things and would narrow the field. I mean, they were speaking broadly, and I just had them for a little bit of time in their office, so be kind to their recommendations because it's kind of off the top of me cold, bringing this item to them. But they said that there's ways to do this, but it's not going to be cheap because there is not a way that they could imagine a corner store or a general business along the lines of what we see most requested for food or small sundries that would allow you to go, get some basic groceries. You need to account for public health and safety. You need to account for access by people with disabilities. You need to account for things that if you were doing small lessons or consulting in your home is very different. And so with home building, you can build up to 3,500 square feet with a residential builder's license. And you don't need to involve necessarily architect or engineer. There's not an equivalent of that for building to the commercial code standards. And they gave me a sheet, which is included in one of your attachments, that is provided by the, I believe, International Code Council. Yes, by the International Code Council. And these are updated on a seasonal basis, so the most recent is from August 2024. And it gives sort of general rules about how much it costs per square foot to build something. They pointed to me that M Mercantile in the VB or 5B category, the very basic construction per square foot starts at $129. So if you start to apply that, then consider site improvements, then consider architect or engineering fees, then consider finishing materials, you can start to get a sense of how much it would cost to create an ACU. Also, depending on how close it would be, regardless of what zoning allows, there are different fire rating requirements as you get closer and closer to other structures, whether on the same lot or adjacent, it wouldn't matter. Fire rating would be very difficult in a conversion, like if you have a home and you want to turn the first home into the ACO. Adding that fire rating to make sure that in the event of a fire, that second floor doesn't collapse onto people. That's really what they were describing to me as the concern and why you would request fire rating and why it's required for commercial. That can be very costly. Even if you're talking about an addition on the front of the home, if it's for one of these purposes, they said it should be built to the commercial code standard, and that will not be cheap. So a standalone structure is probably the least expensive path to one of these. There are a lot of UDC sections that would have to change to allow this, which is fine, but I'm just signaling these are some of the areas that would be affected. Our accessory use sections, our use table, the use specific standards, our home occupation use specific standards potentially, our area height and placement regulations in residential districts, required approvals for development activities by land use, and then new definitions, new use specific standards, and area height and placement sections would need to be created. I spoke with our historic preservation coordinator, Jill Thatcher, about this topic, and she gave me, among other things, some really great precedents that are already in existence in Ann Arbor. There's 6 pictures of them for you to enjoy in the report, but the primary concern is that new buildings are de-emphasized in the historic district design guidelines. And that's not just a local requirement. Our design guidelines have to be approved by the Michigan State Historic Preservation Officer, the SHPO, and that is a general requirement of historic district design guidelines, that you de-emphasize, you screen new construction, and you let the older construction and the historic structures shine. So if these were to be implemented, there may need to be special exceptions to allow non-street facing entrances, for example, if something were in a backyard, to meet the historic district guidelines. Or, although it would require the fire rating and the expensive renovation, potentially, you could restore an existing structure, such as this one at 513 4th Street. This is in our old West Side Historic District. This was a storefront for many years. Now it's integrated as part of the home. But this is an example of a local precedent that exists in Ann Arbor. So follow-up actions for ACUs. We'd like to continue comparison city evaluation. I have pending some research into the city of Raleigh, city of Pomona, California, which allows ACUs, but only if they're converted garages. So there are some places that are doing things with this, but they're not uniform. They're not as predictable as you would see with home occupations. It does feel like probably there are some places that are doing this, but they don't call it this. It just exists, and they're not tooting their own horn, and they're not in articles, and it's a little harder to find those examples. But we would like to spend some more time on that. And then I have been working with our geographic information system staff to pursue geospatial analysis and some feasibility. So how many corner lots within our districts have, if you remove the square footage of the principal structure, might have room left over to build something like this? I still have to go through that data with them to understand more about it. But it's something that I think running some more scenarios and feasibility would be useful. And then the comprehensive plan is already considering how to integrate commercial into our new recommended zones. And this is maybe just a more specific piece of that ongoing work. So we'd like to use that process in the draft plan, which will be coming in the very near future, to engage the community further on this and connected topics. And then because of the extent of this, it may require some consulting assistance, and we would need to sort out that process. Just like 2 more slides, almost done. Small format commercial, not accessory. I think sometimes the examples that I've heard, and this is not just from City Council, but kind of peppered throughout different articles that I'm reading or blogs or people talking, is that just like there's an important distinction between, or a helpful distinction to be made between home occupations and accessory commercial units, there's a third column we could add to that table, which is small format commercial that's not accessory. It's a primary use, but it's integrated into the neighborhood, and it's just smaller in size, but it doesn't have to be on a lot with a residential structure. It could be a mixed-use building, but it doesn't have to be in order to be accommodated within an accessory commercial use scheme. So small format commercial would require amending primary uses in residential districts. The current regulations for allowed primary uses are in table 5.15-1, if you'd like to take a look. And this is already under active consideration in the comprehensive plan. It needed no prompting. This has been a start of our conversations from the beginning and launch of that process. And I included a picture of Big City Small World Bakery, which I think is perhaps an example of the type of small format commercial that could be added throughout residential districts. There's other commercial options for people who are looking to make good use of their skills and enter the economy. Special events can be initiated by an individual, by a neighborhood organization, by nonprofit, etc. These can allow opportunities for small vending for people who are just getting their business started or who are selling small goods. Sidewalk occupancy permits are seasonal permits that allow you to occupy a fixed piece of sidewalk with permission from the adjacent building owner for a small fee. And our peddler's license allows you to sell goods throughout the city of Ann Arbor as long as you have insurance naming the city and pay $45. So those, and the Michigan Cottage Food Law allows you to sell compliant goods with a peddler's license as well. I release my presentation to discussion. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the very thorough report. I really appreciate it. We are considering the proposed motion of the Planning Commission is approving the attached report and forwarding to City Council for consideration and direction of activities. So with that, I think we'll go through discussion and then we can chat about it. Does anybody want to kick us off? Commissioner? Yeah, sounds good. Commissioner Adams.
Let me pull up my notes so I don't screw this up. I guess a question. So current code, when I was reading the materials before the meeting, I thought I understood the ACU issue, that we already permit them, that we already permit home occupation to be sited inside an existing accessory structure. So I was a little bit confused by the discussion around additional onerous building code and fire code and federal law, Americans with Disabilities Act requirements that would be generated by adding an ACU to your, like if I build a garage and I use it for home occupation, the way that code permits me to do, it shouldn't matter what order that occurs. If I have an existing garage and I use it, or if I build one and I decide to use it, I'm not sure why that's changing the financial calculus of that or the legal requirements that attach. I must be missing something.
This may go to the public education component, but we have this clause in our home occupations regulation that says if you comply with all other local, state, federal regulations. So if you had a barber shop in addition to needing to be licensed by the state, in order to complete that activity on site in a garage, you would need a certificate of occupancy for that space, and your garage will most likely not meet the requirements of the commercial building code, and therefore you would not be able to use your garage for that type of use. And that applies to other examples that you can think of.
So I guess it's not that adding an ACU program would generate those costs and those requirements. It's that activity today is likely sliding under the radar in such a way as to not trigger that type of regulatory enforcement. Nobody's getting...
The enforcement is complaint-based, and so we would investigate a complaint for probably generated by some type of generic nuisance, and then if it were found to be an activity that required a certificate of occupancy for something under the building code, they would say, you can't use your garage for a coffee shop. You're not allowed to do that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Dish, I believe you're next.
Yeah, I think as you went on in this great presentation, you addressed, I think, mostly implicitly, but pretty almost explicitly, the big concern that was occurring to me, which is that just as with ADUs, ACUs sound like very expensive, tiny commercial spaces. And therefore, I don't know how many people would really be able to take advantage of them, and I don't know if they would fit what people are envisioning, which is this is a stepping stone or easy way into brick and mortar store. I think you'd probably rather have a big brick and mortar store somewhere rather than a little neighborhood thing, as much as we would like to see more commercial in neighborhoods. So,
right.
Yeah, so, okay. Then you've raised an interesting thing about the idea of small format commercial that is not accessory and does not have to be on a lot with a residential structure. Could people convert small houses to small format commercial? I mean, obviously you'd have to go through all of the ADA regulations and the fire code and all of that, but I'm just wondering if
you met building codes, the primary obstacle would be whether or not the zoning allowed it.
So that would be something that we could change for zoning to allow it, because we still do have smaller houses around the city, and particularly those that are on smaller lots and aren't suitable to be converted into Bigfoot houses, which we really wish weren't happening anyway. Those little houses people might see them as viable for commercial spaces if the zoning would allow it. So maybe that's a more promising route to what folks were trying to get at with this.
You are in sync with the comprehensive plan process, which is actively looking at how do we incorporate more non-residential primary uses in what are now our traditionally residential zones. Mm-hmm. Not under an accessory scheme per se, but integrated perhaps. So then it becomes a question of, do you allow them in a wide open way, or do you tailor them to just the edges of existing streets that meet some type of criteria? Is there a bus route? Is there a certain amount of daily traffic that is on that street? Is it a through route of some kind? Or, so then you can start to think about how would it best makes sense to cluster retail. There's other considerations beyond just the permission. It's where will retail be successful. When you cluster it, then you can also manage trips to certain locations or build other things that are beneficial from an urban planning lens.
True. But maybe just little things sprinkled around that are the neighborhood things that you walk to or you bike to are useful. I know that you mentioned that you wanted to do an analysis of how many corner lots there actually were in the city that had leftover space. I don't know if it's feasible or reasonable to wonder if it's possible to look at how many smallish lots do we have with smallish houses on them? And where are they? Because we don't want to overprescribe and then, oh, there is one, but it's not on a bus route, and it is, you know what I mean? So I don't know if it's worth trying to figure that out or even possible, because it does sound like it would be awfully difficult to count them without.
Sometimes those are also naturally occurring affordable housing, or within the Ann Arbor context, the closest that we get. So converting them may take lower cost housing stock off the market is one consideration too, but sure.
That is certainly possible. Many of these places are getting converted anyway, but, and not in ways that preserve them as low-cost housing. So that might be something. And then I just had a couple of other thoughts about the LA County, and I understand that we don't have to take them as a model or anything else, but I thought that I wondered if you had any idea why they prohibit art galleries?
The only thing that I could think related to art supplies or maybe art galleries is that Los Angeles has a different history of organized crime. Oh. I don't know if art supplies are, people are thinking, oh, graffiti or graffiti gallery, I don't want that near my neighborhood. I don't know.
That seems odd, because when I think of an art gallery, I've
seen the logic before, so
yeah. But when I think of an art gallery, I think of someone hangs paintings and I get to go and look at them and maybe buy them or something. And people do this in Ann Arbor. They have open houses on, special days, the art hops and stuff. And so, I was just thinking that actually an art gallery would be a great use. And the other thing was the restriction to the limits on the retail and emphasis on new goods only. Well, I don't know why they specify it, because if they restrict retail to grocery stores, corner stores, and party supply stores, I don't think anybody's going to buy used groceries or used party supplies. But I could see neighborhoods where you would have little hubs for circularity. So, it'd be great to, gather clothing or child's toys or, these things that people sometimes want to turn over more rapidly, and it would be nice to not have to go very far, but have that in your neighborhood or have other people come to your neighborhood to peruse things like that.
Absolutely. I do not endorse, for the record, the Los Angeles County ACU permitted use table as a model for Ann Arbor. I think we would be much more creative and allow many things that they've prohibited.
That's wonderful. So I think I wasn't trying to hold you accountable for the limits of their imagination, but rather just put on the table some of the things that I know with sustainability, working on the circular economy, things that this sort of thing could foster.
Totally.
Yeah. So, but again, it's the expense. It'd be easier as a home occupation than it would be or as a small commercial use than it would be as a tiny fireproof ADA compliant with bike hoops that are happy for Commissioner Weich. I don't see that being cost effective. So, okay, I'm done.
Commissioner Mills.
I'm going to pick up what I thought when it said no art galleries was, we don't want this to be a destination in the middle of a neighborhood, right? It should be incident. That's how I read that list, as things that people want, that's not the one or two places in the city, right? That suddenly you have the entire city coming to your place, but it's the things that serves the neighborhood. That's how I read it, but maybe not. And I think that's when we think about the places that people are imagining, I think it's the things so that you don't have to get in your car to go and get a gallon of milk or to go get ice cream or a loaf of bread, that kind of thing, I think. I want to give you props for how much this has evolved since ORC saw it. I think having the analysis, and it looked like you had some help maybe on comparative cities, I think was really helpful in identifying kind of where we are out of line. And in fact, I think you made the point that every place regulates a different number of things. You know, they don't, sometimes it's NA, which means it could be a free-for-all, but there's some other restriction. And I feel like, I mean, even if you compare our home occupations to the ACU, like, we allow more space. We allow, you know, larger square footage, or that's in particular, right? So I think that that table really did a good job at kind of laying that out. Just for everyone else's benefit, because it wasn't necessarily in your presentation, one of the things that ORC discussed is like, if we knew why this was so important, like what the use was that our current code didn't articulate, it would be helpful for us. And so I would just, if this goes along with the presentation to council, you put that, it's on page 7 of the report, but I would just elevate that. Like, I think that you're looking at the violations, your explanation of the violations was really clear about why you were doing that, because like, it's not to say, I don't know, the way that you talked about it, like people would be violating things if they wanted to be more intense than what we're allowing, but they're not really. And so that's not I think that was real clear the way you described it, and so maybe I didn't pick that up from the report quite as much, so like that gets at that. But those are the only two things that in forwarding this I would maybe suggest a slight tweak. Otherwise, excellent job. Thank you so much for this research. And I would say, I mean, the idea that you said we can do GIS, we can do all this stuff, I would see how the tables land. Like, and again, what are the cases what are we trying to achieve, accommodate, and might it be this small commercial, like the third option that you kind of presented?
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the examples I think that came up during some of the council deliberations, and also that I've heard informally, is food, and Selma Cafe comes up. I would note there's a reason why I added other commercial opportunities at the end and called out food options, because there are only certain like scenarios where you can have food that you prepare out of your home without the county health, without Washington County Health becoming involved, and they would have to do different levels of certification of what you're doing based on how many people you're intending to serve or the venue, and again, it goes back to an important purpose, which is public health and safety. So making sure that if people do consume food in an unregulated home kitchen, that it is within a certain category, that it's shelf stable, that it didn't involve certain types of food that are known to, you know, proliferate foodborne illness. So some of the, I think, interest in expanding home occupations around food are not solely within zoning. They're larger and, you know, based on good public health precedent.
Yep, I'm going to go to Commissioner Weatherby and then Adams.
So I actually had the Selma Cafe up on my screen here because that was one that when I look at these, I think, wow, this all seems like too much detail to get where we want to get, which is lovely little places in our communities where we can grocery shop or hardware store. That was another one that I was surprised that LA does not want, but I suppose for flammability and things that hardware stores have, I don't know. But then I remembered Selma Cafe, and that what is, you know, Selma Cafe was a home use because it never did have any separate, it was just a house, and it had no employees because everybody volunteered, and you know, at times I was just looking at, they had up to 200 people for a breakfast, and that people were starting to not be able to get their kids to school or go to work because there were too many cars, and there was just, so we probably do need to have limits on some of these things, because if we don't have limits of like number of people, if I look across the street, I'm not going to say what building I look across the street at, but, you know, I think they are currently zoned for like 12 people a day or 24 people a day or something. I mean, I'm not going to count like, oh, you had 28 people today or 30 people. But if there's 400, then it gives us some ability to manage those. But I do think one of the things that we have to be a little careful about is we all go to the good things in neighborhoods. And, you know, I was thinking of like, oh, a florist or a this. Well, it could also be like Nazi paraphernalia, or like there is no requirement that things in neighborhoods are what the neighbors want to see. We talk about goods and services that would support a neighborhood, but that's not a guarantee. That's not something that we always get. So having some checks and balances is good, because, you know, lights and smells and huge numbers of people and things, it does give us some guidelines, both of them. But it does seem a little, you know, things of like enforcement. Oh, well, you use 20% of your house, or 6 people. It seems really sort of overly restrictive, but I understand why they exist. To me, I think one of my things is a little less about occupation and more about impacts to surrounding, you know, neighbors or surrounding, of all the things that could be surrounding it. And I think that to me is a little bit more, I care more about the impacts than the actual occupation, because I do think that there are hundreds minimum of these around the city right now, and most people don't know they exist. As some of you know, my husband plays the bagpipes, and he does give lessons at home, and you might think, oh, you know, music lessons for a violin, that's one thing. Music lessons for bagpipes is another. He had twin students, so music lessons for 2 bagpipers at a time. You know, it changes.
You want us to break that out of the code?
Yeah. I actually like it, so it's not, but yeah, but, you know, there are things definitely that I think could have effects that we don't realize. So, long-winded way of saying thank you for writing all this up. There are reasons to have some of these slightly weird, like, occupations, or, I mean, I think of seasonality of businesses and stuff. If you crochet Santas, you're going to have more people in December than you are in January. But I think this is a really good, but I think it's going to be hard. We want to go back to kind of when this used to be this way, but we don't want certain things, and we don't want rats, and we don't want, and it gets complicated quickly. But anyway, thank you for writing it up, because I think I'd like to live around more stores.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, just to dovetail off Commissioner Mills and Commissioner Weatherby's points. You know, I never visited Selma Cafe, but while we were talking, I was going through some of the Ann Arbor Chronicle discussion of Selma Cafe, and there's also a wonderfully sarcastic letter in our packet written by an anonymous writer, and I'm going to acknowledge that anonymous writer and the time that went into that letter, but it brings up some of the problems that were flowing out of Selma Cafe while it was open, right next to an elementary school, right? Lots of traffic, lots of people driving around, creating a hazard for kids who are trying to get to school and parents trying to get them to school. And, you know, noting here again that I don't think it's within our discretion to permit. If that's the use case we're trying to permit, I don't think we can legally do it beyond the permitting. It probably bumps right into nuisance law. And I think one of the takeaways from reading your report was that I think the rules that we have relative to our peers, based on all available data, are quite permissive and probably run right up to the edge of, I wouldn't say nuisance law, but like they're pretty darn close. So drafting them any closer, I think, runs into problems, and I think we have to know what we're trying to permit. before we would be able to do that intelligently. And I don't actually know what we're trying to permit here. One of the things that I remember reading back in September when this first was teed up, we want more pocket daycare centers. I can acknowledge that, but that's also permitted not as a home occupation, but as another accessory use up to 12 students. So family and group daycare, I think, doesn't require a special exemption use and is already permitted. So I don't exactly know what we're tackling here, and it's hard to expand intelligently without knowing that. And I don't know that that's implicit, I think, in your report, but I don't know if it can be made explicit. Just that we have to actually be a little more surgical about what we're trying to do to avoid creating a Selma Cafe problem instead of something that's a success story.
That is something that I would value and staff would value a little more direction on, because I have heard, maybe not directly, or some of it was in the council resolution, but it is varied. So affordable retail, pedestrian-oriented retail, reducing vehicle trips. There are a lot of different goals. If we're talking about affordable retail, ACU might be affordable in 30 years if it's built now, but probably not coming online. Just looking at some of the numbers, I haven't done a pro forma or anything really extensive, but I'm just looking at back of the envelope that to have a small, format structure that's standalone with finishes might be looking at $500,000. You're starting to look at what, so there's ways that you could think about building potentially into new construction, actually. So you can finance up a fourplex with a traditional mortgage, and I believe up to 25% of that is allowed to be non-residential, for example. So could the city, look into some type of better education around that? How do we see more products that are coming onto the market anyway that might include something, like that's built up front, designed up front to include small format commercial, or integrated commercial, and could that be something that would make the ACU successful? I think this conversation was similar when this community was considering accessory dwelling units, and Manager Leonard was asked, well, how many are we going to see? And today, I think we've had less than 60. So they're expensive, is what we hear a lot. I don't think, especially with the additional standards, that there's a reason that integrating retail in this way would be less expensive. I think it would be more so, and we would see less than we see of the ADUs potentially. I don't truly know, but the direction as to, is it to primarily reduce vehicle trips, to add affordable commercial, to just improve the eyes on the street and the liveliness and the experience of neighborhoods. I think that there are other ways that we could get at some of those goals that maybe aren't commercial potentially in the near term. So I would welcome that direction as well in more detail.
Got it. Thank you. Commissioner Weich.
I'm just going to pick up right where Commissioner Adams left off. I think it would be super important for at least this report to explicitly state what it is we're trying to accomplish. I sort of lost track of it because of all of the regulations of the things we don't want or the problems that we might run into, such that I was like, if you could go back to your second to last slide or your last slide with the bakery, I think in a lot of folks' minds, when they think about neighborhood retail and commercial spaces, this is what they have, or Jefferson Market may be what they have in mind. But this is not what your entire report is about. It's about a whole different structure. So I think in terms of feedback directly to you, one, great report. Thanks for doing all the work. It makes sense. We don't want a BLA. That came through. Having said that, I think there really are potentially two paths here, which is one, the educational aspect of here are the things that are already permitted, such that we don't have to change the code. Two, to actually do the ACUs, it's going to be cost prohibitive for most people because it requires commercial grade inspections, permitting, licensing, and compliance, and all of those things are expensive. So the idea that you're going to be able to put a barbershop in your garage and get that permitted in this way, using this tool, not the home occupancy one, may not be what you have imagined. And then thirdly, maybe this is what you want, this small format commercial, which doesn't exist universally being permitted in our residential districts, but maybe as we work on the comp plan and begin to envision how we bring these things into the neighborhood. And that, I think, might be a good feedback to the council table, to ask the council table to clarify exactly what they would like to see in the city. Otherwise, I feel like we're going to be chasing, I don't know what we're chasing, quite honestly. And because of that, I think it's going to spend a lot of staff time when there are so many things I want us to work on that don't include this.
Thank you. Any other comments, thoughts? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Abrams. Apologies.
Don't apologize. You can only look one direction at a time. Thank you. I had a similar, I'll just follow up on that. I have a similar feeling, and my sense is that the reason we don't have clarity about the goal here is because this didn't originate with us. It originated with another body, and we were directed to do it. So I think it makes sense to me that we don't have clarity on that, and maybe requesting more clarity and direction would also make sense. I also was noticing, so Big City, Small World, and Washtenaw Dairy are zoned commercial. Like, that's the silver bullet there. But I'm wondering how Jefferson Market is able to operate because that is not zoned commercial.
I've got a little bit of history. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Take it away,
okay.
Matt. Thanks.
I would jump in a little bit because in my 24 plus years, yes, I've dealt with that periodically. As far as even right when I started, it was used as commercial, and it's been continually used commercial as far back as we've got the records. But you're absolutely correct, it's zoned R2A. So we had some issues when there was, you're only allowed to vacate or have that building vacant for so long before you lose that non-conforming use stat, and we do not, our ZBA our code does not allow use variances. So we've had that issue come up before, and they've always met that deadline. So that is the reason, is that it has been continually used. But it is an issue, and I'm glad you brought that up, because if that ceases for 6 months or so for whatever reason, that use is gone. So
right.
That's
So
a good
I think that
example.
there's another question here, which would be a different zoning flexibility that would allow small format commercial in a residential district, or use variances. I'm not saying we want to do that, but it's like there are other levers to pull, I guess, is what I'm wondering, beyond ACUs, which feel like perhaps too cost prohibitive to pursue.
The reason why, well, one, because it wasn't explicitly directed in the council resolution, didn't look at small format commercial as a primary use because it spoke to ACUs and home occupations, which are both accessory uses. But also because the comprehensive plan, I'll say it again, the comprehensive plan, it's ongoing, and this isn't like a byline in the discussion of our potential future zones. Integrated non-residential uses by right and discussing what the parameters of those is something happening right now. It was noted that the steering committee for the comprehensive plan, the next one takes place tomorrow. The next subcommittee for the planning commission related to the comprehensive plan is next week, Tuesday. If these are unanswered questions, or it's unclear the direction that the draft is going, I would encourage bringing it up in those forums, because it isn't really useful for the redundant staff effort when this is a huge undertaking of the department and the community with very seasoned outside consultants who are helping us do detailed analysis of that specific thing. So I am trying my best to mention this, but not assume that it is the goal of the resolution because I wasn't told that. But also that I do think it's important, and the good news is that we're talking about it in detail.
Thank you. Any other comments, thoughts? I'll add my just 2 cents of how I read this particular thing would be that home occupation ACUs looking to encourage kind of like an experimental and or kind of like proof of concept of retail before it goes fully commercial. That's the way that I read it. I also did want to look at it from the standpoint of an ACU, an actual built environment being built, right? Like it looks like this square that's built next to a house, but I just thought about, okay, well, they made the investment and it's not working out. My biggest fear would be what happens if that thing goes vacant, right? And does that owner look to re-tenant? And so what does that built environment look like? And that's kind of like where my head goes of like scenario planning for ACUs. To me, like the expansion of like home occupation makes a lot of sense in terms of improving accessibility to different types of amenities. Of course, making sure that we preserve and promote health, safety, general welfare of the communities. I obviously limit nuisance that emanates beyond property lines, things of that nature. But my thinking was that perhaps, or at least my reading of this was, let's try to create pathways. For example, a small baker, I'm just going to use that just because I think the picture is up right now. They go to a commercial retail landlord and they're going to say, I need a 5-year lease and a personal guarantee, right? There's going to be certain barriers to entry when you are looking to relet or you're looking to lease a space that has a commercial oven, for example, or you might be required to put one in, right, for the landlord and have to restore it after the lease term. So I think to me, home occupations, it's like there's a fine line between what's commercial and like proof of concept / like having experiment. And I think anything that we do to reduce barriers to entry is a good thing for people that are looking to, entrepreneurs that are looking to encourage that kind of experimentation. But I do agree that I have some general concerns of this secondary structure of, made the investment, but it's not working out. What happens then, right? I mean, can I lease it out as another bedroom or something like that when it's not designed for such? And so I think that kind of consideration should be had of like the continuity and the adaptive reuse after that initial kind of development. But again, that being said, the encouragement of 15-minute neighborhoods, this concept of, again, a circular economy and having accessibility is always kind of an important thing. So I do think this is a worthwhile topic to be considering. I really appreciate the thoroughness of the report. Mostly my thought process was on that of, what do you do when you're a tenant? if just on the ACU component, home occupation to me, again, encouraging and reducing barriers to entry, kind of an important point for me. Aside from that, any other thoughts, particularly on this report? If not, I believe that the motion that is on the table right now is that we do approve the attached report and forward it on to council for their consideration and a further direction of activities. So with that, do we need a roll call or a voice vote? Let me ask.
It could be a voice vote.
Okay, I'm going to do, it does say roll call.
If you'd like.
Roll call vote.
Commissioner Adams.
Yes.
Weatherby.
Yes.
Mills.
Yes.
Dish.
Yes.
Abrams.
Yes.
Hammerschmidt.
Yes.
Weiss.
Yes.
Lee.
And yes.
Carries.
Thank you. Really appreciate the thoroughness of the report. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda number 11. Thank you, Councilmember Dish. We're at public comment. This is a second opportunity for individuals to speak up to 3 minutes on any issue. We'll first hear from those present, and then remote participants. To speak remotely, please press *9 if on the phone, or use the raise hand feature in Zoom. For phone access, please call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will identify callers by the last 3 digits of the phone number or by name on Zoom. You'll hear an automated announcement when it's your turn to speak, and please ensure that you're in a quiet area and mute any background noises. For all participants, please state your name and address prior at the beginning of your comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak at this time? Extra credit.
Or for Professor Norton's class. He's not
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
We'll vouch for you.
yeah. Okay, with that, seeing no speakers, do we have any remote callers?
There is one remote caller, phone number ending in 534. You have permission to address the planning commission.
Good evening. This is Tom Stolbert calling from 1202 Travers Street in Ann Arbor. Excellent report. Very interesting discussion. Thank you all very much. I think terminology is an issue here and what people's expectations are, whether it be council or the public. Really depends on their own interpretation of the terminology and the phrases. So we've run into this with affordable housing. What is affordable to one person in their opinion, their perception is very different than other people. There's some tight definitions in terms of 60% AMI, things like that. But the general public often doesn't know those tight definitions. So again, a definition of the terminology here that we can all use would be helpful in communicating with council and with the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stolberg. Do we have any other callers on the line? Okay, 2 more seconds. Okay, we'll close public comment. We're moving on to agenda number 12, commission proposed business. Are there any? Seeing none, we're at the final item, which is adjournment, moved by Commissioner Mills and seconded by Commissioner White. All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.